to the Cult of Domesticity podcast, a podcast about history, true crime, and whatever life brings us. I'm Courtney, and every week I am joined by another fascinating person. Let's see what we're going to talk about this week.
Welcome back, devotees. Guess who's back? Back again.
I was going to do it again, and then I was like, wait, I did this last time.
It's just not your intro. It's just the Linzi intro. Is this ridiculous song that I'm singing?
Eminem, me and Eminem, you know, just hanging out.
Yeah.
Have the same little song.
You know. So, you're going first this week.
I am, and I do not have, unfortunately, the theme isn't quite there, but we will be talking about John Wilkes Booth and his run from Ford's Theater in, it was 1865. Just checking my notes.
You know those notes. So, no cannibalism. You've deprived people of your theme.
You know, I was thinking about this and I was like, well, I could say something like, you know, it's like the country was cannibalizing itself, but not really. You know, not really. Also, the war was over, technically.
Yeah.
So
we had already cannibalized ourselves.
we had already cannibalized.
America had.
Yes. So
we were not there. I did the primal thing I marked on students' papers. They would talk about historic events, and they're like, we. And I was like, we did this. Like, talking about America. I was
who's
like,
we?
But who's we, and were you there? I don't think you were, like, especially when I was doing, like, medieval classes, they would do that, and I was like, but were you there? Were you hanging out with Abelard and Eloise? Because I don't think you were. Or, like, Caesar? No? Okay, cool. Let's not talk about this. Really modern events were really hard. They were like, we fought the Germans. You fought the Germans? Man, you look good for being born enough to fight in 1945. Gosh.
Yeah.
You look great. But we're going to talk about the end of another war, the Civil War.
The Civil War. So, yeah, I figured I would go through, like, his run, and then we could talk a little bit about some of the conspiracies around it. So, the war ended April 9th. 1865. That was when the South surrendered. Fun fact, April 10th, a guy named Thomas Harney was caught because he was supposed to bomb the White House, and he was caught the very next day, so that didn't happen.
That's good. We had already rebuilt it once. Let's not do it again.
Yeah, so there were these, like, underlying plots and schemes that the Confederate, just like for later when we talk about it, that the Confederacy were sending up to Washington, D.C. So, and John Wilkes Booth, going a little bit out of order, was a Confederate secret agent. He was a spy. Yeah. I didn't know that. I was like, oh, that's cool. I mean, not cool.
Not cool. It's still cool. Like, it's cool in a bad sense. It's, like, cool that he was a spy. But, yeah, he was on the wrong side of history. For our non-U.S. listeners, this is the American Civil War. So, North and South, secessionist movement because Abraham Lincoln was elected as a Republican. And the South, specifically South Carolina, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while since I took an American history class, was afraid that he was going to take away their slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And thus started the war. Basically, the South formed its own country, and there was the March to the Sea. There's a lot of burning happening, and yeah, the North, the Union, ultimately wins against Confederates to the South.
Right. And so during the war, it was President Abraham Lincoln, and in the South, it was Jefferson Davis. So if I say Jefferson Davis, he would have been who the Confederacy wanted as president.
And I love the fact that it's so awkward because all the generals and, like, the officers all went to the same schools. So they all trained together and, like, all knew each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And even after the war, a lot of the names that were from the South they perform. They were in the government after the war ended.
Yeah, there was if I remember correctly, there was a certain period of time, if you had fought in the war from the South, there was a certain period of time until you could go back into the government. So they wanted, like, that period of time so there wasn't an immediate continuation of fighting just in politics. Or my favorite event in the Senate was the caning. I can't remember. I think it was Sumner.
Yeah, the guy, I remember this from history class. He was, like, beat in the Senate, like, in front of everybody.
Yes, the caning of Charles Sumner. It was the Brooks-Sumner affair in 1856. and Representative Preston Brooks, a Democrat from South Carolina, attacked Charles Sumner, a Republican from Massachusetts, because he had basically, like, insulted slaveholders, and I think specifically, like, someone Brooks knew. So he the guy barely was alive. And the crazy thing is, Brooks didn't get out of the Senate. He was still allowed to continue, even though he almost murdered a man.
Like in front of everybody?
Yeah. And people from the South kept sending him silver-tipped canes after that.
Wow.
But Sumner stayed in the Senate afterwards, too. Like, even though he was, like, barely alive, and he always got reelected. He's crippled for the rest of his life. It was, like, really bad.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So that's our government for
That's the context of around John Wilkes Booth. Everything was very spicy and very contentious and very hot. You know, if you think it's bad now.
Also, for people who might not know either, is like, now Abraham Lincoln is considered one of our best presidents ever, but at the time he was quite a controversial figure, and a lot of people say that the only reason he was reelected, so he was murdered in 1865, but a lot of people said that the only reason he was reelected the year prior was because of Andrew Johnson, who was a Southern sympathizer, basically. So his running mate was someone who had strong Southern ties. So that'll come up later again.
Yeah, and I've also heard arguments for the fact that he's so well remembered is he didn't have to deal with Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Because of his assassination, because his vice president actually got impeached?
Yes.
Or was it put up on trial?
It was like I've read that he was impeached, but he still served. What's interesting, he didn't have a vice president, Andrew Johnson. Anyway.
They might have... Yeah.
Okay, so... right, we ended up at April 10th. So the bomber was caught April 11th. Lincoln delivers a speech in Washington, D.C., and John Wilkes Booth is there and swears that it'll be the last speech he gives. So... April 14th, 1865, Lincoln goes to Ford's Theater, and this is announced in like the paper or something. So John Wilkes Booth doesn't know that he's going to be at the theater until like 11 a.m. that morning. And so he has only like 8 hours to plan this massive assassination conspiracy. That said, he's got all the groundwork needed because he was a Southern spy and because he was part of a team of people who were supposed to kidnap Lincoln like a few weeks prior.
Oh, okay.
So he had a bunch of people like on hand to help him execute the plan.
Execute Lincoln?
Choice of words. So he finds out like around 11 a.m. that like the president is going to be at Ford's Theater that night. So he makes all these plans. He meets with these people being Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, and John Surratt. So he's some really strong names are going around. Yeah. You know, Lewis Powell. Lewis Powell is supposed to be like a hottie kind of. I mean, he... for like old dead white people, only pictures I've seen are them in prison. But he was played by in the movie The Conspirator, I think is what it's called, on Mary Surratt's trial. He was played by the guy who plays Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead. Oh, really? Yeah. He has like no lines, but I was like, oh, hey, it's Daryl. But that's he's supposed to be kind of hot. So Lewis Powell and David Harold, who is a name that'll come up a lot later as we get deeper into this, they're sent and they're supposed to kill the Secretary of State, William Seward, who is already like ill and in bed and like not doing well in the first place. And then George Atzerodt was supposed to kill Andrew Johnson, who was, like we mentioned, the vice president. So Lewis Powell goes into Seward's room and his house, and he's got this medicine package. Oh, Powell's the guy that you always see the pictures of. Like, his picture goes around a lot. Yeah, that picture. Yeah.
That's great for an audio medium. That picture. He
has pretty eyes. I think he's still alive in the picture.
Yeah, I'm hoping, because I mean, the Victorians love to take pictures
dead
of
people. Yeah.
Dead people. Yeah, it's when I post it, you're gonna know the picture because it's like a guy in a long sleeve t-shirt. His hands are cuffed and he's leaning back. He kind of looks like the actor who played the Trident guy from Hunger Games. Sam Claflin. He looks like Sam Claflin.
Oh. I have no idea who that is. Lewis Powell goes in, he's got this medicine package, and the people are like, wait, he wasn't supposed to get medicine. Just give it to me. Give me the medicine, and I'll take it to him, and it'll be fine. He's like, no. And everybody thinks this is very suspicious, because it is. And he ends up stabbing a ton of people, but killing no one. Meanwhile, David...
Sorry, this reminds me of, like Lancelot from Monty Python in the Holy Grail when he goes into the wedding and he's supposed to he's going to rescue the lady, the princess in the tower, and he just comes in and he just stabs kills a bunch of people.
Yeah.
He's like...
This guy, he's like just slicing people around, just blood everywhere. But no one dies. Luckily for those people. I mean, at that time, they did not die that night. They're dead now. They're dead now. But interestingly, two things about Andrew Johnson on this day. So George Atzerodt was supposed to kill Andrew Johnson, but he decided to go to where Andrew Johnson was staying and just get drunk instead. And so he didn't kill Andrew Johnson because he was wasted. Second thing that we'll talk about later probably is John Wilkes Booth, even though he only had 8 hours to plan this massive assassination conspiracy thing, he stopped at where Andrew Johnson was staying and left him a note that said, "Don't wish to disturb you. Are you home?" And then signed it, J. Wilkes Booth.
That's really confident. That's some swagger going up and be like, "Hey, boo, you home?"
Yeah.
Because I'm going to be murdering you later, okay?
He definitely, Booth had a lot of confidence. Booth...
Cojones.
Booth was kind of, and here, this is relevant too, Booth was kind of how I was trying to think of, who might be, a modern, Booth, and I was thinking maybe, Chris Pratt, because he was super handsome, he was super charismatic, he was a terrible... person with very problematic political views.
Yeah, Chris Pratt.
Yeah. So that's who this is Chris Pratt of
or we could say a young Mel Gibson.
Yeah. A young Mel.
That would also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People really liked him as an actor. He was very recognizable, which is another thing that'll come up.
I got another one. Tim Allen.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Tim Allen is a problematic fave.
Oh, I didn't know that about Tim Allen. But also, I didn't think he was that good looking. Was he when he was younger?
I think some people did. He was kind of that everyman good looking.
Okay. So, let's see here. So, Friday, April 14th, day 1. So...
I love it. Day 1. We got this timeline
We got a timeline. He kills... Everybody knows, okay, Abraham Lincoln was shot. He died. The shot is fired somewhere around 10:15 that night, right? And then Booth jumps from the balcony to the stage, yells something along the lines of Sic Semper Tyrannis, which is thus always to tyrants. But sometimes is not mentioned. It is also Virginia's state motto. So
I thought he yelled "death to tyrants" in Latin.
Yeah,
or something from Shakespeare, what Brutus says. I think.
Oh, is it also
in Julius Caesar? I feel like that's what it was. I thought he quoted Julius Caesar.
It was definitely Latin. It was Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. And then sometimes people will say he also said the South is avenged. But yeah. But in jumping from the balcony to the stage, it was a 12-foot drop, and his foot got caught in the flag or whatever that was hanging off of the balcony, and caused him to land oddly. And this will basically, among other things, be very problematic for his escape. Not I want him to escape, but it's gonna hinder him. So 10:30-ish, he rides past the Capitol toward Navy Yard Bridge, which is today called the 11th Street Bridge, and he's allowed to pass, even though there was a curfew. One of the books that I read, like, said that there was a curfew, and, like, no one is supposed to be crossing the bridge at that time, but somehow he and David Harold, who was a co-conspirator, were allowed to pass.
Do you think they bribed the people to let them pass?
It could be that they bribed them. It could also be, like, one of the books that I read said something like he might have been recognized, like the guard might have recognized him, and he would be like, oh, I'm just trying to get by, you know me, JW.
I just finished a show. I gotta get. I didn't realize I couldn't go down the bridge. Do you think you let me do this just once?
Yeah.
You know, smoothed him.
Yeah, and he was a
very Mel Gibson like.
He was a very smooth talker, and very confident. I mean, he was a stage actor, so he could do that kind of improvisational work, like, on the fly. So in addition to being allowed past, like, the guy didn't recognize that because he was also riding a horse, had his, like, leg messed up, because later that'll be used to identify him. Like, oh, the guy with the broken leg is John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah, did he, like, shatter his leg, or did he just have, like, a compound fracture on his ankle or something?
I think it was, like, some kind of fracture, though later on it seems like it's developing into something else. He is on the run, and he's, like, trying to row a boat and run away from all of the army, but somehow it seems like it's getting worse, this fracture, over time.
Well, if you don't treat it, I know there is fear if you break a bone that you can get, like, bone marrow into your blood.
Oh.
And that's like, it can really mess you up. Like, you can get really badly like, ill from, like, breaking a bone and not treating it.
Oh my gosh. So then that's probably, like, what was happening, because over the next couple weeks his leg is, like, getting worse and worse and worse. So April 15th, day 2, they arrive at Surratt's Tavern. Like, this is in the morning hours of that day. They get to Surratt's Tavern, which is a name that'll come up later, where they pick up binoculars, guns, ammunition, and whiskey. And then they get to Dr. Samuel Mudd's house around 4 a.m., and he fixes the leg. Well, he doesn't fix it, but he gives him, like, a brace, and he makes crutches for him to go on.
He probably said it. That's probably what he did. He said it, put it in the brace. He goes, you gotta be careful, but think about it. If you break your leg, the first couple of days, they're always like, don't do a lot.
And he was definitely doing a lot.
He was doing very much.
He was doing a lot. Yeah. Also, Samuel Mudd was part of the conspiracy to kidnap Lincoln a couple weeks prior. So that'll come up later too. I keep alluding to this later, but it'll eventually get there. Sunday, April 16th, this is day 3. They spend the next few days, like, hiding in pine thickets. And they were helped by this guy named Thomas Jones, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it was very cold. It sounds not very nice. Okay, what I was saying because Courtney was, like, hiding behind her hands. I was like, exactly. And then I forgot. People can't see.
They were like the hobbits in the first Lord of the Rings movie, where they're hiding from the riders. Oh, I can't remember. The Nazgul.
Yeah.
And they're hiding behind the thing, chilling down there.
Yeah. That was them. And they had, like, a coded, a 3-whistle. It was a 3-note whistle. And so they would always recognize this person when they were coming. And I was sitting in my bed, like, reading this, and I was like, I was just whistling, and my cats were freaking out. Yeah.
How nerdy can we make this?
So they leave the pine thickets. They're there for a fairly long time. They leave the pine thickets around April 20th. They're going to go on the Potomac River. They want to go south. Somewhat obviously, they're trying to go south towards the Confederates, where they think that they will get support. And P.S. at the time, people in the Confederacy were excited by this. Like, people were writing in their diaries, like, thank God Abraham Lincoln has been murdered, you know. Even people in the Union at the time, because Lincoln was such a controversial figure, they were like, oh, well, this happened. I mean, that sucks. It sucks, but also this guy was not the most liked person while he was alive. Yeah. So, unfortunately, though, they're trying to go south. They end up going north, which confuses me because I don't know. I don't know how they could get that mixed up, but they're traveling a lot at night. And although one of Booth's few objects that he had on hand was a compass, like, they were going north. They went in the wrong direction.
Huh.
Then they were like, oops, we're still in Maryland. We're not even... Virginia, because the Potomac crosses, like, divides Maryland and Virginia. And they're like, whoops, we're still in Maryland. And so then they go to, the next day, they go south. And they kick a freed man, what's his name? Lucas.
This seems like the Oregon Trail, like, or like the Donner Party, and like, we're supposed to go this way, and then they're just like,
whoops, this was like the worst shortcut ever. So
the worst escape plan ever.
Yeah, it's not the greatest escape plan. Also, by this time, because now we're around day 9 or 10, Booth is like in shock that everyone is not happy about this, because he thought that he would be seen as a hero. But he's like, I didn't realize this would be a problem for people. Also, he's offended that the reward was like, people would get $50,000 if they help catch him, and then 25 for Harold, I think it was, and 25 for, maybe it was John Surratt. But he was offended because he thought it was 100,000. And he was like, that's not enough for me, right? Even though he was even worse.
He pulled a Julius Caesar who, like, got mad because pirates didn't put his ransom high enough. He's like, no, I'm worth more.
I'm worth more. But the amount that he was offended over was, like, twice as much as he was actually worth, according to the Union Army, which I think is interesting. So they end up, they kick a former slave, a freedman, out of his home, and they spend the night in his place. Then they make their way to the Garrett farm, and this is like their last stop. The first night that they're there, Booth is very charming and he plays with the kids and everything, and it's not an issue at all. I think that they recognize they were suspicious of him, but he had this whole drawn out story of how he got injured as he was like a Confederate soldier, and they're going under the alias Boyd. Him and David Harold are going as like the Boyd brothers. So he's John Boyd and David Harold is like Billy Boyd. I don't know. That last bit was made up, but
it's good to go like with something that's like your first initial, like, because that way you'll remember it better.
Yeah.
At least from what I've read on how to change your identity and like how to build an alias.
Because you've been doing a lot of like research on this.
I don't have a reason to change my identity yet.
It's good
keywords.
Good information to have on hand, you know.
I mean, it's always good information to have. You never know when you need it.
The day 12, okay, he goes, he pulls an OJ. So the Garretts are like, I can't believe this happened, and the killer must be like this crazy person. The killer must have been sent by the Confederate Army. And he's like, oh, you think that? He was like, well, I think the killer probably did this and was like this, and he like has this whole story he gives, and it just reminded me of like OJ's book, If I Did It, you know. So
it's like, hey, do you want to see how it was done? Let me tell you
exactly. The guy was very heroic. I imagine him to be very heroic. I imagine him to be very handsome.
A believer in the South, that the South will rise again and be avenged. He may have been an attractive actor. I don't know. Might
have been very, famous and handsome and well liked.
He probably put this together on a day's notice, which is really impressive when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think about it. And everybody's like, okay, this is awkward now.
They're all just like looking into their drinks like,
it was just a comment.
What's up with your friend?
It was just a comment, and now we've been here for 90 minutes.
And he reenacted it too, which was really odd.
It probably happened.
He's a pretty good actor,
exactly
though.
Like this.
That guy, who is it? John Wilkes Booth.
Reminds me of that guy. So he's telling them all these stories. There's two Garrett brothers. He tells the one brother one day, and the next day the other brother comes up and is like, hey, how did you get injured? And he tells him the story again, but embellishes even more. And the guy's like, actually, that's weird, because I actually know that regiment that you're talking about. And like the guy in charge, that person doesn't exist. And so then Booth is like, oh, I mean, I don't know. Probably I just got confused. So April 26th is the morning where the cavalry finally catches up to them, because Garrett is like, I think that these people are very fishy. He says, you can't stay in our house anymore, but you can stay in the tobacco barn. And so they go and they stay there, but they're afraid that like they'll take their horses, that they'll steal their horses. So they lock them in the barn. They can't get out. 2:30 that morning, the cavalry comes and surrounds them. And for reasons that I don't really fully understand, they don't barge in. They don't they're there for hours talking to him through the door. And eventually this guy called Boston Corbett goes around and shoots Booth in the back of the head, saying that, oh, this is God's will. He was not supposed to be killed. He was supposed to be taken back to the government so that he could be questioned. Was this a a Confederate plan, etc.? But this guy, Boston Corbett, says, probably I'm just going to kill this guy. And then he did. But Booth didn't die immediately. It sounded terrible. He's just kind of trying to breathe.
Yeah, no, death in that situation, they always say your breath gets ragged. And depending on where he got shot in the brain, different things shut down because they do different things. I wonder if he wasn't kind of sympathetic think about it. If he goes back, Booth was in for probably torture, not a great time, and all that. So he might just be kind of sympathetic, hey, you kind of did, even though you assassinated Lincoln, you did the 2-tap and go. So, or maybe he wanted the money.
Maybe, the whole company ended up splitting the reward money, and Corbett. There's pictures of him on that I saw. He wasn't supposed to kill this guy, and he just said it was God told me to do this. He at some point in time he was like, "Oh, I thought that Booth was going to shoot us," even though they had been talking for hours and Booth hadn't shot them at all.
Oh, that would explain why they were talking to him. Because think about it: if you barge in there and they have guns, there's going to be a shootout. Barns are big, but I can't remember how big this barn is, and so that could have been potentially really dangerous.
Yeah.
I thought they had set fire to the barn.
They did. They put fire. They put the barn on fire, but that's not how he died. He died because Corbett decided to shoot him in the head.
Yeah.
So
and think if you did that and there's a bunch of ammo in it, they always talk about these houses where there's a bunch of ammo and it starts going off because it's heat induced and gunpowder.
Oh yeah. So it's probably
and then you have bullets flying everywhere, which is also not great.
Not good. So, April 26th, Abraham Lincoln's murderer probably died? ? So I just...
Dun, dun, dun.
I went through a super fast rundown of his escape. I would recommend, if you're interested in hearing more about his escape and how people were, general public sentiment and the response to all this, I would recommend James L. Swanson's Manhunt, which is so good. I listened to it twice now, and it's riveting. It's highly recommended. Very detailed as well. But now I thought that we would kind of talk about the conspiracy theories. So the first one that I wanted to talk about was that the assassination was a Confederate plot. So that the idea that he was sent by Jefferson Davis, possibly Judah Benjamin, who was the Secretary of State for the Confederacy. I don't think that this is the most likely thing ever because there's no evidence of this. And Booth, while he was part of a Confederate-approved plan to kidnap Lincoln, there's no paperwork saying that he should kill him. And after one of the things that I read, after they surrendered on April 9th, there wouldn't have been enough time for the message to get to Booth to kill him.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a legit thing, but I don't know.
It could, if anything, it would have been a locally approved.
Yeah, it would have been a locally approved thing. So that gets to theories 2 and 3, which Edward Stanton so he would have been the Secretary of War at the time. And so people think maybe he had something to do with this as as part of some anti-Lincoln thing. Other people will say, again, there's not that much evidence for this. The people who think that he might have had a hand in it is because they think this because, like you just said, if it was sanctioned by someone, it would have been local. Again, Lincoln wasn't the most well-loved person ever. Also, possibly Boston Corbett killed Booth so that Booth wouldn't go back and say someone from the Union government told me to do this. Because why did that one guy decide to take it on himself to kill this guy? I think that that's not the best conspiracy theory.
It's not the best, and there would be documentation of it.
Yeah.
And someone would know. Like, they would have seen him coming in and all of that, and or at least an intermediary would have done it. I believe Stan was Secretary of War throughout pretty much the entire war, if I remember.
I think
correctly.
so. I mean, the war only lasted 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
The third conspiracy theory that I wanted to bring up was that Booth survived. He wasn't actually killed.
There's a whole History Channel thing about this.
Yeah. Apparently, the FBI researched this as late as, like, the 1970s. Like, is this accurate?
Let's not lie. Hoover was probably all about this shit. He was a big fan of conspiracy theories and shit like that. Hoover probably ate it up. He's like, what? He could possibly be alive. Let's get on that. Some lone guy in his office just like, God damn, again?
I have to research
I told
this?
you there's nothing. Yeah.
They, like, got boots, and they were trying to figure out, like, are these boots, etc.? Okay. And why people think that is because, like, I think it was, like, the 1870s, some guy ran into this guy, and I think it was Texas, and he said, oh, I'm John Wilkes Booth, and had this whole thing. My question is, why didn't he make his way to Mexico like his plan was? Like, him and Harold were on their way to Mexico. They wanted to get to Mexico. So why was he in Texas? Maybe because he thought, well, everybody thinks I'm dead now. I don't know. Regardless, I don't think that's the most likely thing. If any of these conspiracies are true, I personally would say it's the one that Andrew Johnson had some kind of role in this. So again, Andrew Johnson was Abraham Lincoln's vice president. They did not get along. Johnson was VP, so he would be in position to become the president. He was a Southern sympathizer, so people who were in the Union government but didn't totally love Abraham Lincoln thought that maybe Andrew Johnson would be the better person to put the country back together because he would have been a Union representative, but also be mindful of Southern priorities or whatever.
We know that didn't work out well for him. He got impeached.
He got impeached. The other thing that people will reference is the note that Booth left for him at his hotel the day that all of this went down. And they would, you know, like, why did that happen? What's that about? Etc. Also, for me, I mean, again, I'm not, like, saying that this is what happened, but Mary Todd Lincoln was convinced that Andrew Johnson did it, or had some kind of hand in it. So
she had a whole lot of issues. But
I was talking to Daniel, and I was like, she was basically the Marianne Williamson of the time. Like, she was kind of loopy. People didn't like her a lot. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Johnson was the first president to be impeached.
Yes.
And so if people don't realize, if you're impeached, there's another step that they have to take from office, and he wasn't removed from office.
Correct.
He was just impeached.
Same with Clinton. Clinton was impeached but was not removed from office.
You have to be pretty bad to actually get from office.
I don't think no one has been removed from office. I mean, because Nixon would have probably been removed, but he resigned before that could happen.
Yeah, there's been a couple other cases where I think for medical reasons they kind of would have removed the president, but it was all hush-hush. There's a president whose like girlfriend or like daughter was like helping run the government for a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I cannot remember for the life of... It might have been Harding, I'm not sure, but I can't remember
Harding,
who it was exactly.
I remember he has like some raunchy love letters. Warren G. Harding.
He's in Ohio, man. I've been to his house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's in Southern Ohio.
Wow. Harding. Well, the only other thing that I thought was interesting enough to mention in this episode was that Mary Surratt, not John Surratt, whose name has come up like a couple times in this. Mary Surratt was charged as part of the conspiracy and was hanged as the first female that the government killed for her role in the conspiracy, which was basically owning the tavern that they all met at and had these meetings at.
Mary Surratt, I knew that she was the first woman executed, and it was a big deal because I think they debated about it for a really long time, like, should they actually do it or not?
Well, what's interesting, too, is that they were not tried by, like, a public jury. It was a military tribunal.
Yeah, so you get, was it Marshall? court-martial?
Yeah.
Yes, instead of a civilian court.
Yes. But they weren't at war, and so later, less than like 2 years later, when they finally got John Surratt there, he was tried by a civilian court, and they let him go. But they killed his mom. Basically, in my opinion, because they were so angry that their president was just killed, that they killed the lady as well. You know, her only crime really, that I could discern anyway, is that she owned the place where all of these people met. And also she dropped off binoculars at the tavern like the night of or the day before or something. But other than that, it's like, why didn't the guy who set his leg and built Booth crutches, why didn't he get killed? You know, he let him stay there when he knew that Booth had done this, but he got life in prison and was later pardoned by Johnson.
I wonder if there's more information about what she did or did not know, or like
maybe. I mean, it seemed like they the court was not clean. Like the arguments against her and the arguments in her defense were not the best arguments. The arguments against her, like one of the things that they said is because the hottie that we saw from the picture, she said he came in, the Union Army, they were all there, trying to figure out what the hell is happening, right? And he comes in and he's like, whoops, just kidding, not supposed to be here, bye. And they were like, hold on, who are you? And he's like, Mary Surratt hired me to like dig a hole for her or something like this. And so then they were like, oh, Mary, come over here. Do you recognize this guy? And she was like, I don't recognize that man at all. And so that was one of the things that like helped convict her of being part of this conspiracy, is that they just contradicted each other like live. The defense says, well, it was dark and she has poor eyesight that's been documented. And he was also in disguise. So, like, it's not beyond, it's possible, you know, that she didn't recognize him. The other thing, I can't remember the other thing. That's it. There was another problematic thing that the prosecution relied upon, but I can't recall. Like, there was one guy who said, I'm sorry, I won't even go into it, never mind. But there should have been corroborating evidence that didn't exist for the second thing. And so, why was she killed? No one really knows.
It was probably she just got swept up in the conspiracy, and they're like, well, she must have knew.
She must have known. It's the thing of it is, for me, is like, why was she killed? And not John Surratt, who was a known Confederate agent, and not Dr. Mudd, who clearly and obviously helped him, like, post-murder. Doesn't make sense. But that's my story.
Yeah, it seems like it was just, like, capable attorneys not doing great jobs on the case.
Yeah. Also, it was problematic that it was, like, a military tribunal when we weren't at war. And her lawyers, the night/morning before she was executed, had gotten a stay on her execution, which was, like, not upheld, or somehow, like, Johnson had some kind of direct role in making sure she was murdered. Or, well, executed by the state.
General John Hancock and the U.S. Attorney General James Speed personally appeared in court to inform the that it was canceled, because Johnson canceled it at 11:30. So they got at 3 a.m. He canceled at 11:30 in the morning. Yeah,
like there was a brief period of time where they thought she was at least going to get a retrial, but then later, like hours later that day, she was executed.
Yeah, that just seems like there's a lot of fishy things. Like, why immediately have her executed? Like, why cancel the writ? Like, at least let her have another trial, unless she knew something.
I mean, that's what they said at the time. Still, I think it's weird that, like, the son could just go off and be fine. And he had gone to Canada, and then he was in England, and then they caught him at the Vatican. Oh! And then, like, and that's why some people, like conspiracy people, think that the Vatican had some kind of role in Lincoln's assassination. And I was like, that seems even further than the truth than the other ones. I don't know. That seems random.
They're Charlie Day in his room of red string just being like, guys, I got it. And you're like, Charlie, when have you left this room?
Sounds
you know?
Like
Oh my god, that was great. Do you have anything you want to plug?
There's this great podcast called The Cult of Domesticity. You can reach
on it.
You can hear that on, well, whatever podcast player you're listening to this one on.
That That was fair.
I had a podcast called 33% Pulp. You can still listen to it. We read books in thirds. It was super fun. Courtney was on a couple times. You can check that out. Otherwise, I'm waiting for my next project to happen. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on again.
Thank you for having me.
This was fun. I haven't gone into a good conspiracy theory lately.
It was super interesting to research, and I'll send you all the links that I have. And I really recommend Manhunt by James Swanson. It's like a page turner, and yet it happened like in the 1800s, and you would think, how is this a page turner? But he made it such. Recommended.
And next week, I'll be back with Linzi to talk about a murder. Another
murder. Yay.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Slackers. I'm Matt.
And I'm Jesse.
We host American Slacker, the show that keeps you updated on all of the weirdest news around the globe, along with what's going on in the world of Xbox, music and movie suggestions, and fun interactive games.
Every other week, we bring on interesting guests from all walks of life, from filmmakers to musicians, funeral directors to small business owners, and even Jeff Goldblum.
What? No, we never got Goldblum, man.
Oh, a man can dream, can't he?
American Slacker Podcast. New episodes every Wednesday.
Available on Spotify, iTunes, and all of your smart devices, or anywhere else, you might happen to cop a podcast.
They're downloading MP3s, not buying an eighth. I'm shutting this shit down. That's it.
There you go.
I'm Elisa Lucas from Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits. I'd like to start a movement where we spend more time loving on our friends because although friends are important to us, they're often in the shadow of other relationships. So if you want to love on your friendships a little bit more, embrace friendship a little bit more, or just appreciate your friendships a little bit more, then this podcast is for you. We'll explore all the different ways friendships take place, share the amazing stories of friendship, and discuss best practices for the difficulties that friends may experience. It's time to embrace friendships because without our friends, who would we be? So check out Best Forevers on iTunes, Stitcher, and all the other podcasting listening venues. And be sure to follow Best Forevers Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Cult of Domesticity. We're available on all podcatchers. Remember to rate, review, subscribe to help spread the word, or just force other people to listen to it. Our Facebook and Twitter are at Domestic Podcast, and our Instagram is at the Cult of Domesticity. We also have podcast merch at Threadless. As well, if you want to support us financially or show some appreciation, we have a PayPal tip jar and a Patreon, which has some pretty great perks. Any topic suggestions, feel free to email us at domesticpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to stay domestic and cult-free.